Hello, everyone, and I am here to discuss and review Big Brother Canada 3. This was the first season that was moved on to global from Slice, so it means that it had a much bigger budget than the prior two seasons, and you definitely see it in the production value, in the setting designs, as well as the industrial theme that they used all over the house. This was also the first cast to have 16 house guests, and they went out of their way to make sure that most of the cast were super fans. And I believe this is the most super fan heavy cast of North American Big Brother history. And I'm kind of mixed on it. This was the first season that I watched feeds to at the time. So a lot of the time, the cast would spend hours talking about creating their own podcasts, pretending to be Rob Haps the podcast, creating their own All Stars list, and they spent so much time talking about past seasons that they kind of forgot that they are on a Big Brother season themselves. But of course, none of that made it onto the edit. With that in mind, I always had BBCAN3 as one of the lower tiered seasons, and I didn't enjoy it much. So I was interested in seeing how I would receive the season now that it's 8 years old and I haven't rewatched it since it aired. It was never a season that I actively went to rewatch during the few times that I did rewatch a Big Brother Canada season over the last 8 years. And now that I've rewatched it, I actually enjoy it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I do think that the cast had a lot of gamers, and with that in mind, it led for a fun season because there was no one person completely dominating everyone, and this was the first season where there wasn't a pagonging or a steamroll whatsoever. Damn near everyone was self-interested, damn near everyone wanted to make the moves that would prioritize themselves, and it was just really interesting seeing this fast-paced season, especially compared to the last two seasons where there were more steamroll-ish seasons, and especially compared to Big Brother US, which had just gone through a slew of pretty bad seasons before this one came out. Even though I think this cast out of the three has the strongest amount of gamers, I do think that because this season had so many twists and more than the last two, it hindered them a lot and it caused them to play safe all other times, or it just completely derailed the natural momentum that the season was going into because the twist just threw everything off, and due to that, it does cause the season to be a bit dissatisfying at times. Overall, it is a light cast, there isn't much drama, but it's a likable group, and you can tell that they actually enjoyed being around one another. There are a lot of fun times together, and there are a lot of iconic moments that are still remembered in BB history, heck, even Big Brother North American history, 8 years later. So I'm going to go through each week based off of what I picked up on, talk about the boot, and then after I go through every single week and every single round, I'll discuss my concluding thoughts on the season. Compared to the other Big Brother Canada week ones, I do find this to be one of the better ones, but I think that's mainly due to the twist that takes place where there's nothing in the house and Canada's vote, so you have to see all of them react to it. So it stands out more compared to the others. So I'm going to go through the intros just to see how they edited it to hint who would be paired with who and what their strategies would be. Zach and Ashley's intros clearly pair them off together and play off their sex appeal, with slight game talk coming from the two of them. Jordan's intro is all about playing art, chess set, and rambles on about how he read a bunch of manipulation moves, so he has the uber superfan intro. Godfrey mentions that he will fight for everything due to coming to Canada from Zimbabwe. Sarah doesn't believe in religion, marriage, or a government, so anything goes for her, as she wants to be a party girl. Brittany is shown right after Sarah. I wonder if that's a coincidence, and she mentions that she was picked on and insecure about her weight when she was younger, but she learned how to be fierce. Neha talks about being a chiropractor. She mentions being an uber super fan, and Johnny also mentions being an uber fan as well, talking about wanting to be a merger of Emmett and Neda, the two best BBCAN players at the time. Bruno mentions being flirty and charismatic, and is the typical construction family man otherwise, which is kind of contradictory, but anyways. Kevin mentions how being a poker player will help him thrive in the BB house due to mental fortitude and calling people's bluff. He also mentions being a ladies' man. He mentions loving cougars and wanting to rub his head in you know what. And then they pan to Risha, who knows that she is a cougar. How ironic, since this is in the same package as Kevin's would-be wife. Cindy tells us to not forget that she's Cindy with an S. Pilar laughs a bunch and talks about how she likes jumping around, but she knows how to adapt because she moved to Canada from Mexico 6 years ago and had to learn English. Risha talks about her parents dying of cancer young and having to raise her younger sister and herself, causing her to learn quickly. So the cast enters the house and are completely shocked that there's nothing in the house. They all do their intros with one another. Cindy mentions her name with an S. Jordan mentions in a confessional that he likes her, and of course Zach and Ashley are crushing on one another in the diary room. People mention Risha's boobs, and they can tell she's a confident, ain't-taking crap type of person. They skip over a bunch of the intros in the edit, with only Sarah's being shown talking about being a pothead. Aressa speaks to the house and tells them that they have to earn their way to get stuff in the house. She also tells them that there will be no HOH and everyone has to nominate 2 people in the diary room. The 2 people who have the most nominations will be nominated. Long story short, Risha and Cindy end up being nominated, though Bruno and Bobby get a lot of votes. Actually, I'm going to read everyone's votes. So, Ashley nominates Risha and Bruno, Bobby nominates Bruno, ironic, and Sarah, Brittany nominates Risha and Cindy, Bruno nominates Bobby, very ironic, and Pilar, Godfrey nominates Bobby and Pilar, Greg nominates Cindy and Pilar, Johnny nominates Neha and Cindy, Jordan nominates Cindy and Risha, Kevin nominates Bruno and Risha, Neha nominates Cindy and Godfrey, Pilar nominates Zach and Bruno, Risha nominates Cindy and Ashley, Sarah nominates Kevin and Zach. Interesting and a good read, though she mentions later on that Zach was her target on day 1 and from the very beginning. Cindy nominates Risha and Pilar, and Willow nominates Sarah, ironic, and Cindy. Zach nominates Godfrey, very interesting, and Cindy. Cindy ends up winning the veto competition, where it is done in day 1, just like it was in BBCAN3. Cindy has to choose the replacement nominee, where she chooses Pilar because she had yet to speak to her, and Jordan criticizes Cindy's choice in not using it to backdoor a big threat. Risha is worried because she knows that she is gone if she doesn't bond with the house. Risha is trying to flirt with some of the men, and it isn't working, since people like Kevin see through her tactics. Johnny talks about how he's crushing hard on Kevin, just because the latter gave him some towers to sleep and they cuddle. Johnny's entire edit this season, especially pertaining Kevin, is really creepy and cringeworthy. Risha is given a pep talk by Cindy, but she is worried because no one wants to game talk on the first night. Cindy does the same thing with Pilar, trying to be a BFF with both of the nominees, and mentions that Pilar doesn't have a strategy, which the latter believes. Jordan and Zach make a final 2 with one another because they have the strengths that the other does not have. Jordan being the brains and Zach being the brawn, though it seems like Jordan already knows Zach is a huge fan who knows a lot about the game. Risha goes topless in the hot tub, and we see Sarah and Brittany bond with one another, though we later find out later in the season that they almost immediately make an alliance in the first day. Sarah mentions that Kevin was the one who popped the balloon, which they waste so much time on in the episode, and Kevin gets a lot of unwarranted screen time throughout the season in general. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of Alec and Peter from season 1. Craig is teaching everyone yoga, and Cindy with Risha are isolating themselves, with the latter not wanting to deal with the house and going on a rant about Pilar feeling so secure that she's staying. Aressa tells the house that Canada voted to evict one of the nominees, and Risha ends up going home. I actually remember back in the day voting for Pilar to go and for Risha to stay, just because I felt like she was such an interesting casting choice and I wanted to see her on the feeds. And looking back at it now that I'm a lot older and there's an 8-year difference, Risha was never going to blend in with this cast, and it has been confirmed by many of the other house guests that she would have been voted out anyways by a house vote. I definitely think she could have been an interesting person to watch, not as a game player, but as a personality, had she stayed around. But she kind of just got the MILF edit, which made a lot of people uncomfortable in the house. In general, from the very little we saw, it seemed like she isolated herself a lot, and she had a bit of a temper compared to this level-headed cast. So she just wasn't going to fit in, though I get her frustration with wanting to play the game and not having much time. With week 2, I think it's a solid week. Yeah, I'll say solid. It's not a great week, but it's not a bad week either, but it's kind of a bit above mediocre. And I think it's just due to the utter randomness that ends up happening that caused a chain of events throughout the week. So, Kevin immediately throws the HOH competition once Brittany jumps off crying, so he can comfort her to look good. Jordan immediately calls this out in the diary room, which is a good read on his part, with himself and Zach also agreeing 10 minutes before the competition to throw it. It seems like Sarah knows that Zach threw it as well, because it's not realistic for this huge football player, quarterback, to not be able to do well in endurance. Bobby reveals that there was an alliance called the Chop Shop that was created in the first few days, consisting of himself, Bruno, Craig, Willow, Zach, and Ashley, though as we see, Zach never really gave a crap about the alliance. Cindy tries to seduce him in the HOH competition to get him to fall off, which is very funny, but it failed as he still wins the HOH. They end up cuddling on the couch and she plays with his nipples, but even he sees that she is using flirting to a strategy. I forgot that this was how the dynamic starts off, especially compared to how it ends as the season ends, or at least with both of them in the house later on. Zach ends up telling Jordan about the Chop Shop Alliance, which reaffirms their alliance. Zach and Jordan's alliance is called Newport, and they plan to play both sides. Neha and Sarah also have a tight alliance, and they, as well as Brittany, made an alliance with one another on night 1. We get a segment of Kevin bonding and flirting with the girls, claiming that it will help his social game, but it never amounts to anything in reality. Bobby is claiming that his strategy is to act like he has no game and no alliance, who wants to make an easy move, which is a smart move on his part. Because he is threatened by Kevin, and Kevin dropped out second, Bobby wants to nominate the first 2 that dropped out. Neha knows that Bobby talks game, despite his appearance and trying to play dumb. So she talks to Zach, who she knows he is close to, which is smart on her part. Zach plays dumb like he doesn't know much, and Neha also calls bluff on this. Apparently, Kevin and Jordan have an alliance called the Fortress, but it's a fake alliance on Jordan's part. I forgot how many alliances were formed early on in the season, and there are so much more alliances on the feeds that I can't even remember. They do end up mentioning in the finale recap that there are a ridiculous amount of alliances early on in the game, and how it doesn't really happen much, but because this was the cast of superfans, that is the case. And comparing it to the first 2 weeks of the prior 2 seasons and later seasons, you can definitely tell that this cast was full of superfans due to the amount of alliances that were created. Sarah and Brittany claim that Bobby should go after a physical threat who was going under the radar, and they mention that there are a lot of men doing this. So Sarah spends the night in Bobby's HOH room to do this, but she gets nothing out of him. Bobby nominates Brittany and Kevin for eviction. Cindy has a conversation with Willow, Neha, and Sarah in the HOH room to keep all the women safe, since one woman already left and they don't want to lose another. Kevin was in the HOH bathroom and overheard the entire conversation, which causes them to freak out. I remember watching this mess live and it was crazy. Greg ends up telling everyone in the house, and of course they try to make Kevin look like a mastermind, which is done a lot through the season, though he just does what he should have done. But the guys want Kevin off the block now to replace him with a girl. Sarah mentions that Neha has the tendency to freak out, so she needs to calm her down, since Neha wants to immediately pitch for Cindy to go up as the replacement, while Sarah tells her that they shouldn't be pitching anyone right now. Kevin ends up winning the veto. Bobby is thinking about nominating either Cindy or Neha, since the former is a physical threat and the latter is a social threat. Though I actually remember otherwise watching the feeds, as she kind of had a resting bee face and didn't talk to many people. I forgot about the hot tub moment where everyone, or mostly everyone, no matter their gender, starts making out with one another, and this happened quite a bit on the feeds throughout the season. On the episodes, Zach and Ashley starts their showmance, though it wasn't as much as the edit made it seem like at this point on the feeds. Neha throws Cindy under the bus to Bobby, but he thinks that she's the brains of the operations, and then Cindy campaigns to Bobby that he should keep her, since she will always be a target in front of him. Bobby ends up nominating Cindy anyways, despite the 2-week deal that she offered him. People like Ashley and Brittany don't really feel bad for Cindy, since she put herself in the position and rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Brittany and Sarah talk about their trio with Neha, but Sarah thinks that Brittany doesn't have her head in the game, so she won't put all of her eggs in her basket. Clearly, Sarah prefers Neha over Brittany at this point, and Neha is her number 1. Bruno wants to split up Sarah and Brittany, so he and Craig spreads rumors about Neha trying to get Brittany out of the house, which spreads around. The last we see of this is Neha telling Brittany that Craig is going, and she starts to really vent. Cindy campaigns people's heads off, while Brittany decides to not campaign, since it will benefit her. Zach and Jordan talk about their alliance, and the latter telling the former not to hook up with Ashley yet, and to think of Jordan when thinking about kissing Ashley, so he will be turned off, which, interesting. We then move on to Kevin and Johnny cuddling, only for Kevin to cuddle with his future wife Pilar, which saddens Johnny. We then move on to Jordan and Cindy randomly making out. BBCAN makes a prank with breaking the camera, and everyone is in the H room, and it causes for Godfrey to fight with Cindy, which he claims was strategy, but it makes him look worse, especially since he was caught overplaying before the feeds came on during the first week. Cindy is evicted in a 12-0 vote. So, at this point, Cindy is clearly a bad player. She rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, instantly in night 1, causing her to be nominated, and she might have gone home if she didn't win the veto, but her winning the veto just put a target on her back since it showed that she is good in competitions. And her getting second in the HOH this week only incentivized that. She didn't check around to make sure that no one was around when she started the conversation about the girls needing to rally together, and she just came off like a game bot, while struggling to connect with people on a personal level. So whenever she did talk game, it just went through one ear and out the other. She is an enjoyable presence, and losing her at this point is a negative since she's one of the few very dynamic people in the season. Week 3 is one of the standout weeks of the season and is one of the best of the week as well. It is one of the few weeks that has a lot of tension, drama, and even some tragedy. So there's a lot of emotions involved, which isn't something that we get too much from this season. Kevin tried to throw the HOH, but he ends up winning it. He is very angry and is brought into the vault room immediately to instantly make nominations, since it is an instant eviction, and he nominates Neha and Brittany. Kevin claims that it will bring him in with the guys more, though he doesn't care for them at all, as he does consider nominating Bobby and Craig as well. Neha is worried because she knows that she's a huge target in the house and they are gunning for her, which they all showed by consistently picking her in the HOH competition. Greg and Bruno both talk with him in the pantry and push him to target the Johnny, Neha, and Sarah group. Jordan and Zach bring Kevin into their little trio, and Zach mentions that keeping Neha is smart, since she would go after the guys and taking out their targets for them. Since if they remove Neha, Johnny, and Sarah, it would make them meaning Zach, Jordan, and Kevin, at the bottom of the group with the guys. Neha talks to Kevin about the 4-person guy alliance, which is Greg, Bobby, Bruno, and Godfrey, and how they were going to send him home last week. Kevin seems convinced, though I remember him in later years stating otherwise. Kevin reveals that his nominations are Neha and Brittany, and everyone has to reveal their votes publicly. Neha goes home on a 9-2 vote, and she tells Arissa that she claims that she tried to lay low, but it just didn't work. I do think Neha suffered a lot from Neda comparisons, as I do remember in the feeds they completely compared her to Neda, And they didn't even give Neha her own identity. But apparently, she made a few comments about how she is ready to play the game and how she would slit people's throats, where it made the likes of Bruno and Greg immediately know that she had to go. She did enough work to want Jordan and Zach to keep her around, and it did seem like she convinced Kevin to keep her around, though of course it was after he already made his nominations, and she really had a fight to do well and to play the game. And she had one of the stronger personalities in the cast, and losing another strong personality really hurt the season. I would have loved to have seen what she could have done had this incident with fiction not happened, though I do think she still would have been a pre-juror or an early juror at the very latest, since she does come off as intimidating, and that usually doesn't work well for minority women. I don't think it's a coincidence that they haven't done an instant eviction in the following 7 seasons, since I don't even think production wanted Neha to go. This is the first example of Big Brother Canada 3 ruining the season with a twist where things would have been a lot more interesting had they had just left things alone. Sarah melts down because she thinks Brittany is going to be upset about giving Neha a sympathy vote. Jordan also isn't pleased with the result, but it does put them, meaning Sarah and Brittany, as bigger targets. As the girls are packing Neha's stuff, they all realize that 3 girls have left and there's only 5 of them left. Even Kevin isn't pleased, since it was a shield that was removed. Bobby thinks that he was the mastermind behind this somehow, which so isn't the case. Even Willow is realizing that she needs to start flipping to the girls, since she knows that going to the end with all guys does not benefit her. And while Willow doesn't get a strong edit in the season, this does show her potential as a player, since while she is close with the top shop side, she does develop relationships with the other side of the house. So she could float, and she does somewhat float throughout a majority of the season. Sarah and Brittany end up winning the HOH, but the latter takes the HOH because she was on the block twice. Greg is panicking as he is speaking to Sarah, hoping that Sarah can pitch to Brittany about it, and accuses her of working with Johnny, which isn't helping his case whatsoever. Brittany wants to target Greg because she thinks he is running the house/alliance, which is so not true, and was why she was on the block, or at least she thinks that. But she wants to backdoor him and tells him that Johnny is the target. Zach and Jordan are thrilled with the HOH results, since they can play the middle for a bit longer and take the shot at the guys that they don't feel like taking themselves. Bobby does not want to be used as the pawn and throws Johnny under the bus since he voted Brittany out, but that just digs him another hole with her. Brittany nominates Bobby and Kevin since they both nominated her and would make easy puns. Greg still buys the narrative that the house is stating about Johnny being backdoored. I forgot that Zach is called Captain Canada in the house at this point, which shows his biggest flaw as a game player in the season, which is his complete lack of threat management. The fact that they're calling him this barely 2 weeks into the season does not look good, and it's something that he continues to struggle with. Johnny ends up winning the POV, as Sarah and Kevin also end up quitting the competition. Greg noticed that Johnny spent the prior night with Sarah and Brittany in the HOH room, despite Johnny supposedly being the backdoor target, which is a good read on Greg's part, and he asks them if the video is getting used, but they state that it isn't. He clearly starts to panic because he knows they are full of crap, and panics to Bruno, who doesn't believe it. Brittany ends up speaking to Greg and tells him that she knows that he thinks that she can be manipulated by him, and she says Johnny's name in the conversation. This causes Greg and Johnny to argue in front of the entire house in one of the few fights of the season. Johnny vetoes Kevin, and Greg is a replacement nominee, where he is called a bully in the speeches, which I just think is a bit much. Greg does not want to speak to Brittany when she tries to make an olive branch to him, and Bruno has to calm him down. Bobby decides to sulk for strategy to go under the radar so he can stay, and Jordan calls both of the nominees dumb in the diary room. Zach and Ashley claim that they are not hooking up because Bruno and Willow would get distracted, which is a weird read in my opinion, but they end up kissing at the end of their conversation. Sarah doesn't buy Bobby's quote-unquote nice guy who doesn't talk game or win comps motto, or a narrative, and she thinks it's complete bullcrap once he speaks to them. Ashley and Bruno want the alliance to vote as one. Interesting that Ashley still believes in the alliance, but smart on her part, and Bruno wants to keep Greg as a shield, and she seems willing to do so, at least by the edit. They have the conversation with Zach and Jordan, who isn't in the alliance, but it's a good for his game that he's in the room and shows how much the Chop Shop trusts Jordan about how keeping shields make sense. Godfrey, who is an affiliate of the Chop Shop, wants to keep Greg as well. Zach and Jordan have a conversation about the live feeds being on all the time, and it's pretty funny since him and Ashley have been frisky in the have-not room. Kevin figures out what triggers the have-not room, and it hints at a future twist that will be unleashed later on in the season. Willow admits that she is playing both sides, but tells the alliance no one suspects them. Greg goes home in a unanimous 10-0 vote. While Greg isn't a bad person, or I don't think he is as bad intentioned as the likes of Andrew and Tom before him, he is just as, if not more, annoying than them, as he's just very loud. All of his random catchphrases just didn't catch on to me. And because he was so loud, people made the misread that he was the leader of his alliance, though he was only a member of it. He just fell into the typical obnoxious, loud, early boot male athlete who gets misconstrued as the leader of the alliance, though the better, more superior player hides under them and is able to use them as a shield. Greg served his purpose fine in the season. I'm not even going to mince words about week 4. It's a very boring and a very forgettable week in general. And the season starts to slow down a bit at this point, especially from the high that it came off of. But luckily, it was just in the middle of 2 of the greatest weeks of BBCAN3. Godfrey feels like he's the next target since he was so close to Greg, but it doesn't matter since Bruno ends up winning HOH, and Godfrey ends up helping Bruno with the competition by handing letters to him. Sarah knows that she's going up since Bruno is being avoidant with her. Zach and Jordan are fine with Bruno winning HOH since he will take a shot at the other side that they wouldn't take themselves. Johnny knows that he is the target since he has done better in competitions than Sarah, with Brittany being the replacement nominee if possible, which Bruno confirms with Zach. Apparently, Sarah, Brittany, Johnny, Jordan, Kevin, and Zach made an alliance last week. Sarah wants them to vouch for her, but of course they're not going to do so since it would jeopardize their game, and Sarah really starts to whine and complain about it, which honestly gets pretty annoying, and it's a pretty entitled viewpoint from her, in my opinion. Kevin talks to Bruno, but the latter knows that Kevin is not with him. Bruno tells Brittany that she isn't going up at all, and they always have a solid relationship through the season, so I guess this saves her here. Kevin and Pilar start their showmance, and it's interesting how much they focus on Zach and Ashley, but Kevin and Pilar were the ones that got married, and I'm pretty sure Zach and Ashley fizzled almost immediately after the season. Sarah complains about Pilar and Ashley being carried through the game by their showmances. Ashley and Bobby talk about Bruno's plan, and Bobby wants Bruno to target Kevin. Bobby in general is very laser focused on Kevin the entire season, since he doesn't see Sarah as a threat, but Ashley sees Kevin as a future ally since she is close to Pilar, which does eventually happen, and it's a good read on her part, and it shows that she also has a self-interest in herself. Bruno nominates Sarah and Johnny, with Sarah pouting about her allies feeling safe. Sarah and Johnny feel alone since everyone knows that they are safe, and that the two of them are the targets. Everyone targets Johnny in the veto competition, and it causes him to be sad due to Kevin being one of the ones to shoot him in the competition. The whole Kevin and Johnny arc was so cringeworthy the entire season. The competition is set up where the targets have no chance of winning, so it's unsurprising that Bruno, the HOH, ends up winning it. Kevin blatantly distances himself from Johnny, which Jordan is proud of since it shows Kevin is putting the game over friendship, and Johnny is really sad. Jordan and Zach decide to placate Johnny just in case they need him in their back pocket and just in case he stays. Kevin decides to do this but rants in the diary room about Johnny needing to give up and that he came in to be a heartless player where he's really playing this up. It just reminds me of Peter and Alec once again, and it's really annoying. And it just shows how much of a producer pet Kevin was. Bruno is considering to backdoor Zach since he sees the latter as a threat, and also notices that Jordan is in love with Zach, but it doesn't seem like something he is heavily considering. Godfrey clearly wants him to take the shot, but clearly this isn't going to happen. It seems like Godfrey and Zach have been eyeing one another as targets from the very beginning, and this is even before their little feud starts. The veto ceremony starts, and it seems like Bruno is not going to use it, but he's called into the safe room and is given the double veto, since that is the twist of the week. He considers putting up one of the two showmances. He decides not to use it, since he does not want to piss off the showmances and Jordan. Sarah speaks to Godfrey after the ceremony, but he calls out that she hasn't talked to him the entire game, but he agrees to her allegiance. Both kind of know it's BS though, but Godfrey explains that he's just lying his butt off through the season. Johnny campaigns to Zach since the latter apparently controls 5 votes. Bruno and Jordan have a game talk, and they both see through the other and their games. Zach and Jordan have a montage about how everyone trusts them in the game and how they are running things, but joke about how things will backfire on them. It's crazy how much that ended up happening and how soon that ended up happening. Bruno and Bobby talk, where the latter mentions that JP and Zach kept on looking at one another during the ceremony, and Bruno knows that they are a tight, dangerous duo, but he needs them for another week. Sarah and Willow end up making out in the storage room. It's interesting seeing Willow's journey throughout the season and how this led to her starting her coming out story in real life and it taking place on television. This happens after another one of those making out sessions with everyone. Sarah does the gummy bear strategy with Johnny, where she mentions that she's flipping to Bruno, Bobby, and Godfrey to target Zach and Kevin next week if she stays. Again, I feel like she is doing this because she is pissed off that they didn't campaign for her to not be on the block. Johnny uses this info to campaign to Zach. Johnny is evicted by a 9-0 vote, and he thinks that being close to Neha is the reason why he became a huge target. Johnny was really annoying through the season, and I know a lot of it was the edit, since they just mainly had him talking about his crush on Kevin and how unreciprocated it ended up becoming. And the fact that they really played this up and they told him to keep focusing on it just made him come off as very annoying. Though, personality-wise, he's a nice person and he clearly wanted to play the game. And I don't think he did much wrong to cause his early boot compared to a lot of the others, as he definitely had some potential to do some damage and to make it a lot further. In general, I feel like he is one of the more forgettable people of the season. But with all that put into place, there's really not much that you're going to think back on when you think of him compared to everyone else in the season. So we are starting the jury phase at week 5, which has BBCAN3 having arguably the shortest pre-jury phase in Big Brother Canada history. And this week is definitely a classic Big Brother week, not only just for Canada, but North American Big Brother history. You have 2 people who are running the game completely blowing it because of their overconfidence and wanting to come up with a convoluted plan. But their downfall also comes due to a twist while all the pre-jurors are sequestered together, which usually doesn't happen where there are pre-jury buybacks and they are allowed to cross-contaminate and share information with one another, causing their games to be blown up, and for this returnee to not only have immunity, but to come in after nominations have already been done. So it causes a scenario where the returnee, who doesn't play in their best interest at all, to give us one of the best weeks in Big Brother Canada history. So the Chop Shop doesn't want Kevin to win HOH, Bruno wants Godfrey or Bobby to win, Newport wants to win HOH to target Bruno and Bobby, though I think they should have just continued throwing, and Godfrey wants Zach and Kevin's heads. Zach ends up winning HOH and Jordan runs into Zach's arms, first out of everyone, which a lot of people notice. Ashley narrates that the diaper alliance between the showmances of herself, Zach, Kevin, and Pilar exists, which also includes Jordan. Jordan himself is upset that he didn't win and that he celebrated. He is upset because for some reason he thought that his and Zach's relationship was a secret when damn near the entire house already knew. So to overcompensate for this, Jordan offers himself up as a nominee against Godfrey. So him and Zach can disguise their relationship, which everyone already knows about. Godfrey goes on and on and on in the diary room about how much he wants Zach out, which is pretty funny. The Chop Shop planned to backdoor Kevin this week, but Zach is choosing to go with the Diaper Alliance, with the intention of backdooring Bruno or Bobby, and then he ends up telling Godfrey that he is going up as a pawn, since everyone knows that there's a backdoor taking place. Jordan comes in the conversation and is happy, which makes Godfrey more suspicious, since he was told that Jordan is the other pawn. Godfrey tells Bruno the plan, and Bruno is instantly thrown off, since he knows how close Jordan and Zach are. Zach nominates Jordan and Godfrey for eviction. Cindy ends up returning to the house via competition, and all the pre-jurors compared notes about what needs to be done, so whoever comes back has a set plan. Many of the house guests are worried, but some are excited about the new twist. Zach is changing his plan to immediately send out the person who returns. Unfortunately for him, Cindy won herself immunity for the week, but Zach is thinking that this could be good since Jordan and Cindy had a showmance and he could use her as a number. Sarah knows that Cindy is good for her game, so she tells Brittany to put aside her issues with Cindy. I forgot that they didn't get along, so they can pull her in as a number before Jordan can. Jordan tells Cindy about his diaper alliance that she could be a part of, but she isn't interested since it involves Zach. Really stupid move on her part, and even if she faked it, at least it would have been an in for her, and she could have had some protection, and she could have actually worked on some of the relationships within the diaper alliance to eventually get them to target Zach, but she doesn't even take that into consideration. Jordan throws the veto by pretending to be asleep, since he wants to appear weak. Very dumb to throw a veto when you're on the block. Zach ends up winning the veto. Jordan is expecting Zach to use the veto to take him off the block, but Zach tells him that he can't use the veto. Jordan realizes that Zach is playing for himself over the alliance, so Jordan throws Zach, who was a part of the Chop Shop and the alliance running Kevin out this week, under the bus, solidifying his fortress alliance with Kevin. Kevin mentions that the Chop Shop has 5 of the worst players in the house and that he's the best player in the house. Utterly ridiculous. Read on his part. Cindy tells Sarah that she was sequestered with the other pre-jurors and tells Sarah about the Chop Shop, which causes Sarah to want to go after Zach now hardcore. Godfrey and Jordan have a convo where the former throws Bruno under the bus for being the mastermind, and they come up with a plan to pitch to Zach so Godfrey can come off and Bruno can go up. Zach is not interested in the conversation with Jordan, and Jordan feels betrayed, even crying his heart out in the diary room. He then talks to Sarah, and she tells Jordan that Zach is closer to the Chop Shop than him, which is not a correct read, but I see why she claimed this. This move would make more sense if that was Zach's actual intention, but since it isn't, it just makes Zach look even worse. Of course, Godfrey has his infamous blood in your hand speech, and Zach does not use the veto. This is obviously the pivotal moment where, for the rest of this season and for most of the other succeeding BBCAN seasons, all the HOHs and all the nominees have these obnoxious speeches that are almost used as like tools and like fights in a weird way. And I think it only subsided somewhat within the last 2 seasons, but this infamous moment has a lot of influence over the next several seasons pertaining how people handle nomination, veto, and eviction speeches. Even Zach throws his sassy shots at Godfrey during this veto ceremony. Zach and Jordan have a conversation where the former mentions that if the house guests were smart, they would send Jordan home, but they won't because they are both valuable players that the house likes socially. Godfrey and Cindy talk about how they both want to go after Zach, but she also mentions how she is enjoying her time with Jordan, but it's just because he is aligned with Zach, which I think is so stupid, but anyways. Cindy talks to Brittany and Sarah about keeping Godfrey, but Sarah is nervous about campaigning since it will all go back to Zach. Cindy then speaks to Bruno, who is interested in keeping Godfrey, but thinks Bobby won't go for it, since he's about keeping the peace. Both sides are nervous about the other, since they aren't as close and will not remain close after this. Bruno tries speaking to Bobby by using gummy bears, but Bobby's just thinking about the chop shop. I forgot there's a weed smoking segment on the show since it's 420. US would never air a segment like this on their show. Bobby and Cindy are stuck together for 24 hours, where he tells her that he has a secret veto, but this is a lie that he created so he can avoid being on the block. Bruno talks about all the showmances in the house, which is Ashley and Zach, Cindy and Jordan, Sarah and Willow, and Bobby and Brittany, which, interesting, and even predicts that Kevin and Pilar will get married. Bobby, Bruno, and Brittany end up speaking, and she tells Bobby that he was supposed to be backdoored this week, which Zach did tell her. It wasn't this conversation that actually convinced Bobby, but there was a separate conversation from I remember on the feeds where Brittany and Bobby were just talking. It was just the two of them, and it was here where Bobby flipped his vote. I feel like this is one of the few good moves that Brittany actually makes, but she doesn't get much credit for it, unfortunately. Jordan goes home in a 5-4 vote and is a huge blindside, arguably the biggest blindside in Big Brother North America history. I actually don't know why they didn't include Willow in on this vote, since she was close to Sarah, Bruno, and Bobby. I really don't know why. It would have made sense. I guess they just wanted to be as close as possible. I remember on the feeds, Jordan was mainly the main perpetuator of the podcasts and talking about prior casts and all-star lists, so I was annoyed with him on that, and I thought he was very similar to Peter and Alec. But during this rewatch, I didn't feel like that at all, and I could enjoy him a lot more. Since he did have a lot of good reads, he was actually very good strategically and very good socially. Him and Zach worked really, really well together, and he had a close bond with the Sarah side of the house and had decent relations with the Bruno side of the house. Seeing the arc of his closest ally accidentally sending him home and both of them getting overconfident was a great conclusion to his arc. While his plan was very crazy and ultimately didn't work, he was definitely just screwed, since if Cindy didn't return, there would be not enough votes to boot him and the Sarah and Bruno sides wouldn't have collided in general. And even Cindy, the only reason why she did this is because she wanted to make a big move and because she had all the information from the pre-jurors, mainly Neha and Greg, where they found out that Jordan and Zach were playing everyone, and if they weren't even in a room together, they wouldn't have found this out. And Cindy easily made a bad move in turning on Jordan just because of his association with Zach, where she could have integrated socially and strategically, and she could have eventually gotten him to turn on Zach, and Jordan would have been someone who protected her. Overall, Jordan's a good character that I enjoyed on this rewatch, and he is definitely a good player. Maybe not a good player, but he's not a bad player and showed a lot of promise from the 5 weeks he was in the game. But of course, he is going to get clowned for the horrible move he made, and that's justifiable. After the greatest week of the season, week 6 is very disappointing, and it causes the aftermath of the blind side to pretty much go thud. There was very little payoff, and it was just very disappointing to watch, and the season started to slowly go downhill from here. So Cindy wants to pin the vote on Willow, and Sarah tells her not to lie too hard. Zach was trying to find out the votes, and Sarah calls Zach and Jordan out for playing her the last few weeks, how Jordan knew that he was going up, and it's not about voting with the HOH all the time. The two get into a minor fight about this, though it's clear he's disappointed about how his HOH went and how he's technically the reason Jordan went home. Bobby tries to throw the HOH, but gets the question right and removes Cindy from the cop, destroying any chance that the two sides who came together for this flip could ever work together for the rest of the season. Bobby and Bruno want to go under the radar this week and to not piss Zach off. So it's clear they want to work with Zach, and Zach still has some sort of pull despite going against him with his own HOH. So I guess that's good for Zach. Kevin also throws the competition, and Pilar wins the HOH, which is the most boring outcome ever. Cindy tells Pilar and Ashley that she voted to keep Jordan, so it causes them to think Willow was the vote. Bobby immediately tells Zach that Cindy was the vote that got Jordan out, and of course he tells his alliance. Cindy wakes up in the middle of the night to tell Kevin and Pilar that she was the fifth vote and told them that she made her vote because there's a Chop Shop alliance that exists. She even brings Godfrey, Brittany, and Sarah into the HOH room. And of course, the Diaper Alliance doesn't trust her after this, especially since she voted out her own showmance. The Have-Nots competition is fun, with Godfrey and Zach in these balls keep on ramming into one another over and over again to let their aggression out. Kevin and Pilar talk, and he tells her that Sarah and Brittany are not threats to them and that they should nominate Cindy and Godfrey. Cindy pitches to Pilar to target Bruno, Bobby, and Willow, with the conversation being cock-blocked by Kevin. Godfrey tells Pilar that he knows she's nominated him because she follows Ashley, who follows Zach. Pilar ends up nominating Godfrey and Cindy. Cindy tells Pilar that she is disappointed in her, which makes Pilar feel bad, since she also claims that Zach and Ashley are manipulating her. Pilar cries in the washroom and tells Bobby and Ashley about the comment. Bobby decides to call Cindy out while she's peeing in the bathroom, and it causes a scene, which obviously pisses Cindy off, since she thinks Bobby is a coward who would never say that to her face. Godfrey ends up winning the POV, and Sarah comes up with a plan for Cindy to get Ashley, Pilar, and Zach in a room and to throw Bobby under the bus, since Sarah remembers that when she was working with Zach, he told her how much he dislikes Bobby. Cindy mentions that Bobby tells him about the veto lie, but she thinks he's stealing it to get people to not nominate him. The Diaper Alliance discuss it, and it seems like they are contemplating nominating Bobby, but nothing comes to pass after Cindy goes after Bobby in her speech, and Godfrey goes after Zach again in his speech. Cindy bashes Bobby for not saying anything to her face, and Godfrey talks to both nominees, bonding with them since one of them are going to jury. Sarah mentions that she feels that she carries Brittany through the game, and tells her that they need to separate for the rest of the week, mentioning in the diary room that she'll stab Brittany in the back if she needs to. I forgot to mention that Pilar nominates Brittany as the replacement nominee. Cindy speaks to Bruno, who claims he would like to work with her, but she is too impatient and she's targeting his closest ally in Bobby. She then tries talking to Zach, and he states that her sting is better, but I think it's BS. Willa and Sarah get a lot closer, and Willow tells Sarah that Bobby's secret veto is false, with Bobby being a lot smarter than he appears. Sarah throws Brittany under the bus even more in the DR, mentioning that she doesn't have enough relationships to give her any information, though she was the reason why Bobby flipped last week. Willow also confirms the Chop Shop to Sarah, and they go on a date. And Cindy ends up going home in an 8-0 vote. While Cindy is very entertaining, very likable, and gave us the best week of the season, she played her return all wrong. She should have went with Jordan and joined in the Diaper Alliance, where they would have been an alliance of 6, and that would have been 6/5 by the end of week 5, and she would have been in the majority. She could have continued working on her relationships with Sarah, Godfrey, and Brittany, while also getting closer to Ashley, Pilar, Kevin, so they could use her more. And even Zach was a relationship she could have worked on at least temporarily, since he was willing to work with her through Jordan. And Cindy tends to whine and complain and calls everyone stupid and idiots when they don't play the game the same way as she does and don't see the game throughout her viewpoint, which gets very annoying. Ultimately, I feel like her game was worse the second time around than the first time around. Week 7 is somewhat of a mixed bag to me. The part that is actually the triple eviction is riveting TV and has some of the best moments of the season. But for the part of the triple eviction that's the normal week, meaning the 7 days in the first round, it's very, very boring, and the edit tries to overhype it to make it seem like some big moves happening, but nothing out of the ordinary is really happening. Everyone is after the couples, which Bruno and Sarah mentions separately, and doesn't want one of them to win HOH. Godfrey throws it, which he continues to throw several competitions, and Kevin wins the HOH, since he is tired of throwing comps at this point. Bruno, Bobby, Willow, Sarah, Godfrey, and Brittany are all sad about the HOH results. Kevin is pitching some huge, sexy plan, where he just wants to get rid of Bobby. But that's not a sexy plan, but he's hyping it up, since that tends to be what he does. Even last week when he was talking to Pilar, he was saying that she could go for the sexy move, which I guess would have been Bobby, or going with the safe move, which is what she did. Zach is, of course, pitching for Godfrey, but Kevin is not interested, as he's hoping Godfrey targets Zach for him eventually. Willow is playing both sides, since she voted to keep Jordan, so they trust her, and she crashes their meeting. They ask her if she thinks that Sarah, Brittany, Bobby, and Bruno are a thing, and she denies it. Willow is playing them and tells Sarah that Bobby and Godfrey are the targets for the week. Kevin claims that he needs to convince Bobby to go on the block as a pawn, claiming that Godfrey is the backdoor plan. Bobby mentions that he could go on the block, and Bruno is like, WTF? Bobby offers himself on the block because he does not want to be backdoored, since it would expose his veto line. Bruno believes Bobby is the target to split himself up from Bobby, and he tells Godfrey this. Kevin tells Brittany that he's going to nominate her along with Bobby, which pisses her off since she knows that they apologize to ease their own guilt, outside of giving a crap about her, and that they still view her as a weak player. He also tells Godfrey that he won't nominate him, and that Zach is hugely afraid of Godfrey. Kevin nominates Bobby and Brittany because he is intimidated by Bobby's body. Okay. Brittany is annoyed with Kevin's speech, and Bruno is sketched out by Kevin, so he hugs him a bunch of times to try to make it seem like he trusts him, and Kevin tells Bruno that Godfrey is the target, though Kevin doesn't believe Bruno at all. Sarah is getting annoyed with Brittany since it's obvious that she keeps being a pawn because the same people keep on winning power, so of course, those same people are going to continue using the same pawns. All of Kevin's allies think that Godfrey is the backdoor target this week, though Kevin hints to Zach that Bruno/Bobby are the bigger threats, which Zach does notice but still hates it. Kevin ends up winning the veto as well, and we have to deal with Kevin and Zach dressing and cleaning up as mates, which is pretty funny. Kevin tells his allies and Godfrey that the latter is not getting backdoored and continues to lie to Bruno and Bobby. Kevin is acting like it is a huge move that he isn't using the veto and it doesn't get used. Bobby reveals that the secret veto was false and at least kept him safe last week. The Diaper Alliance is fine now that Bobby's veto lie was exposed. Bobby seems like he's accepted his fate, but Bruno and Godfrey tell him that he has 2 votes. There are 2 showmance scenes with Kevin and Pilar and Willow and Sarah, while Will tells Sarah that they need to get rid of Brittany, since Bobby is a competent who is loyal, and Willow knows that Brittany just wants Sarah to herself, which is a good read on her part, since it is true. Bobby overhears Ashley, Sarah, and Willow joke about how the chop shop is over, and Bobby tells all the guys. The girls notice that all the guys, but Kevin, are talking about there being a potential girls' alliance. They overhear the guys mentioning having Ashley, quote-unquote, which he of course does not take well. Bobby is evicted in a 7-0 vote. Out of everyone in the cast, Bobby actually shocked me in a positive way during this rewatch, since he had a very linear strategy from the very beginning, which is to act like he didn't know what he was doing, act like he wasn't playing the game, but he wanted to make the safe move and to be a reliable muscle ally and a number. And he did have the occasional good read at times, but he was too linear in his plans and viewpoints where he just thought and saw chop shop, chop shop, chop shop, chop shop, chop shop, even when Bruno knew that it was over. How he immediately threw Cindy under the bus after the flip wasn't the ideal move, since that could have been an avenue that he and Bruno could have used, especially to gain power over the likes of Zach, but he just went back to status quo, which is kissing up to Zach, and it bit him in the butt. He was also never able to get close to Kevin and Pilar, and I think his biggest issue is that he isn't adaptable. Outside of that, he is an okay personality where he can be funny at times, but he's also one of the more forgettable people in the season. I know he's dating Maddie now, and they've been dating for almost 5 years now, which started around the time BB6 just recently ended, so good for him in that element. Brittany ends up winning the triple eviction HOH and nominates Kevin, Zach, and Pilar, as she wants the diapers gone and feels comfortable with Bruno and Godfrey, while she also is contemplating Willow since she finds her more intimidating than Pilar and Ashley. Zach doesn't even bother trying to speak to Brittany, but the girls do speak to her. Ashley tells Bruno and Zach that Brittany told her that Kevin and Zach were going up. Bruno ends up winning the veto and takes Zach off the block in a huge move as he wants to use Zach as a shield and to shift the dynamics, since he believes that there's a girls' alliance, which causes Brittany to nominate Willow. Bruno makes a speech about how it isn't a shot at Brittany, so it's clear that it is a shot against Sarah. Bruno and Sarah get into a huge fight for aligning with Zach, or for Bruno aligning with Zach, and there's some mention about a gender war that's been brewing over the last few days. It is a really good fight, and it's one of the few intense moments of the season. Kevin and Willow are evicted since there was a 3-2 vote to save Pilar. Sarah does not react well to the fact that her vote accidentally sent Willow home. I've mentioned it a few times already, and I will say it again. Kevin reminds me a lot of The Shield. Generally has a more demure personality, which does well in the Big Brother house, and has the occasional read here and there, but he overestimates his importance and skill sets strategically and socially, where most of the house is sketched out by him and he doesn't really do anything to repair it. But because he is a good DR talker, he is allowed to control the narrative, even if it isn't accurate. I do like how he was self-interested with keeping Godfrey in his back pocket since he knew that he can't beat Zach. But I think he could have handled the Johnny situation better, and he really needed to get in with either the Sarah side of the house or the Bruno side of the house. And his closest ally in Jordan didn't even value him that much. As a personality, I enjoyed him more than I thought I was going to enjoy him, though I think it's because he isn't as obnoxious as the Shield are, though he fills the same type of role. Let's see if he improves or not as a player in BBCAN3, since I think he's pretty mediocre here. I believe Willow is the most under-edited person on the season, but from the few things that we get on the episodes, and from what I remember of her on the feeds, she had a great social game where mostly everyone liked her and they all trust her to some extent, where she was always in a great position, because she had the protection of the chop shop, but the likes of Sarah and other people in that side liked her too, and also didn't see her as a threat. And the Diaper Alliance also trusted her as well. She was the one that was trust screwed. It would have been interesting to see what she could have done if she was either in power or made it to the end game. Despite that, she has one of the smallest princesses of the season, and outside of her brutal eviction and her showmance with Sarah, she also isn't the most memorable. The season essentially goes downhill from here, and week 8 is not an awful week. Actually, somewhat is due to the coup d'etat, but before that, the events of the week are just okay. Not much is really happening that is notable, and nothing that will stick out in your mind. And of course, the coup d'etat makes the game very cheap at this point, since it completely alters things, and with the way it is presented, is easily worse than it is in Big Brother 11. Bruno wants to win this HOH so he can separate the remaining showmans by booting Ashley, which I didn't realize before I rewatched this, and so Zach can be all his. Godfrey throws yet another competition, and despite Bruno begging for Ashley to throw the HOH to him, she decides to take the HOH for herself. Bruno and Zach bro out and officiate their alliance. Bruno tells Zach that Ashley and Pilar will take one another to the final 2 over him, which is true, and Zach does not believe it, but plays it up for Bruno. But it's clear Zach isn't going to take Bruno to the end. They are in agreement with Brittany and Sarah up to send Sarah home. Ashley just confirms that Pilar is her ride or die and wants to go to the final 2 with her. Godfrey mentions that the entire house is filled with pairs, with Ashley and Pilar being a pair, Sarah and Brittany being a pair, and Bruno and Zach being a pair. So he makes deals with all of them. Ashley wants to split Sarah and Brittany up and to target Sarah, but she tells Godfrey that he is going to be a pawn. Sarah makes her pitch to Ashley and Pilar and tells them that she is going to target Bruno and Zach. The two, especially Zach, cock-block Sarah several times in a funny way that I liked to watch. Ashley nominates Godfrey and Sarah for eviction. Ashley is targeting Sarah because she is targeting Zach. Godfrey is fine with being on the block because he is safe, and of course Zach is thrilled. The fembots want Brittany to win the veto, so Bruno could be the replacement nominee. Sarah pressures Zach to tell her the truth about being the target, and of course, he lies. Sarah ends up winning the veto, and Zach pushes Ashley about putting up Brittany, who's been asking not to be a pawn, so now she is a target, so Zach throws that dig in, even though he knows it isn't Ashley's best move. Ashley claims that it's her HOH and she's going to do whatever she wants, but it's clear she's going in that direction. Brittany and Sarah are initially sad because they know she's going home. The coup d'etat comes into place where Sarah and Brittany are voted into being have-nots by Canada, and they react poorly since they believe Canada hates them, but it takes a while for them to realize that it is a blessing and not a curse, as Brittany finds the coup d'etat, but she can't tell Sarah the details. Sarah vetoes herself, and Brittany is named the replacement nominee. Godfrey is worried since Brittany is the pawn star where everyone besides her goes home. Brittany is using the conversations that she has over the next 3 to 4 days to see who she needs to target with her coup d'etat. She has a conversation with Godfrey about them both targeting Bruno and Zach. Zach tells Brittany that she isn't a pawn anymore and she is a threat, so she's thinking about using her power on him. No one wants to tell Sarah and Brittany that the latter is going home, which I think is just battery management on their part. Brittany has a conversation with Bruno about the game and the vote, where he becomes really cagey, which rubs her the wrong way. Sarah and Brittany then complain about how Ashley and Paul are playing for the guys, and talking to the girls doesn't help them. Zach and Bruno continue to bro it up, and Godfrey continues to be a lone soldier, while making fun of speaking to Pilar while he works out with her, and he does so just so he doesn't have to hear her speak. Sarah and Bruno have a conversation where Bruno mentions that she is throwing him under the bus in her campaign to save Brittany, and Sarah mentions that Bruno is campaigning for Brittany to leave. Brittany enters the room and he gets really angry and storms out of the room after it turns into an argument. Brittany ends up using her coup d'etat to take herself and Godfrey off the block and replaces them with Zach and Bruno. Bruno is sent home in a 4-0 vote, and I don't know why she targeted Bruno over Zach. It seems like an emotional move in my opinion. Bruno is definitely one of the better players of the season, and he did make the season interesting, especially during the second half of the season, with the move to veto Zach and the arguments that he got into during his last 2 weeks. So while I may not like him a whole lot, though he isn't unlikable or a bad person, he showed a lot of strategic promise and he had better reads than his allies, but at the same time he played safe a lot of the time, and at the end he got very emotional, to the point where it did cause his downfall. He definitely did get paranoid about the Girls' Alliance that did not exist, but he was definitely twist screwed with the coup d'etat. But at the same time, if it wasn't for Cindy returning, he would have been the first juror anyways. While he played it a bit too safe and a bit too linear in the beginning, while not having the best social game to back it up, he did learn that he had to change his strategy, which at least appreciates that self-awareness, though a lot of the flaws that we will see in Big Brother Canada 5 are in this season too, but just to a lesser extent. Week 9 just continues the boring and downhill trend of the season that started within the last week. And I think with weeks like this, especially in the endgame, what makes or breaks them are the dynamics between the cast and the strength of each cast member individually. And unfortunately for Big Brother Canada 3, the dynamic personalities just isn't here to carry these boring weeks, compared to the prior 2 Big Brother Canada seasons. Godfrey speaks to Brittany and Zach separately, reaffirming whatever deal they have, and Zach is clearly annoyed with Godfrey's lies and BS. Godfrey mentions that he only has Brittany's back for a week since she just saved him with the coup. Godfrey throws the competition to Sarah, where she does end up winning HOH. Zach tries to use the sympathy card to get Brittany to get Sarah to ease off him, and he mentions that they always had a good relationship. I do remember that there was a situation on the feeds where Brittany had a crush on Zach and Ashley disliked Brittany for the entire season because she thought Brittany was a threat to their showmance or whatever. Sarah and Brittany talk about the game and know that Zach is the number 1 threat. Godfrey will take Pilar to the end over one of them, and Pilar won't turn against the showmance even if it's better for her game. And Ashley didn't have to do much in the game. Zach is feeling the pressure of being the big target and shield in his alliance, and Sarah of course nominates Ashley and Zach. Sarah mentions how Zach has been her target since day 1, which she did vote to nominate him on day one, so that is true, though she did end up working with him throughout the next 3 weeks afterwards. But she knows that she can't take the shot and miss. Sarah, Brittany, and Godfrey know that Pilar cannot win the veto since she'll take Ashley off the block, and they'll both vote to keep Zach over Godfrey. Ashley is kind of sulking in her bed since she knows she can't beat Zach in the end, but she doesn't see herself going against him or Pilar whatsoever. Zach comes up with a plan to have Ashley and Pilar to form a Final Four Girls Alliance with Sarah and Brittany, which would cause Sarah to nominate Godfrey and send him home. Pilar executes the plan to Sarah, and Sarah rightfully and immediately sees through it and doesn't buy any of it, since Pilar keeps on screwing up the pitch, which is very funny. Ashley wins the veto, and Pilar quits her second competition of the season, and she pitches the plan for the all-girls Final Four Alliance, while telling Sarah that she's fine voting Zach out. Sarah doesn't believe it at all. Sarah tells Pilar that she's going on the block, and of course she ends up doing so after Ashley reveals herself. Zach and the others make a bunch of corny jokes and puns about diapers, crab, and how their alliance is done. Sarah and Brittany are nervous since Pilar is not doing enough campaigning to stay. Godfrey is in general very untrustworthy, and Zach is using his relationship with Ashley to get her vote. He then works on his relationship with Brittany, claiming that she needs to take Sarah out and people will target her after he leaves, which Brittany doesn't believe. Zach goes home in a 3-0 vote. I find it funny and hilarious that Zach was the big bad villain of the season, which is so ridiculous. Since he only got into one minor confrontation, he is very calm, level-headed, and he didn't have an ego like even Emmett did. I'll have to say that his HOH is very, 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 very bad, and it's one of the worst in Big Brother history. But he got chickened out and got scared due to the twist of Cindy coming back in, and it caused him to lose his closest ally. And I do think that losing Jordan hurt him a lot in the game, since they were very compatible game-wise, and Zach never found that compatibility strategically wise with any of his other allies, and he became a huge target for the rest of the game. And while he did make it through several rounds, I don't know how much of it had to do with his own doing, but he still has a social game on lock. He still had good strategic ideas, though that definitely whimpered after Jordan left, and he was still seen as the big threat. His main issue was his threat management, and he never managed to control it. But he's clearly around 6'5" fit and wasn't a dummy, so it was never something that he could really hide. Anyways, I will say that he was twist screwed twice, with the returnees twist with all the pre-jurors being able to hang out together and plot together where they compared notes on him, and then there was, of course, the coup d'etat, which caused his showmance's HOH to be null and void, and for Brittany, one of his targets, to stay in the house. Despite his mistakes, he's still one of the better players of the season, and I did enjoy him and his role on the season. It is the double eviction and Brittany wins HOH, where she makes the easy moves of nominating Ashley and Pilar. Ashley wins her second consecutive veto, and Godfrey is the replacement nominee, where Pilar goes home in a 2-1 vote. So I will say that Pilar is a very nice woman, and it's cool that she found her husband and one true love on the show. But as a player, she virtually did nothing and didn't really strategize at all. She definitely needed to be led by her allies, and her alliance didn't even form until week 4, if I remember correctly. She wasn't a threat to win at all. No one took her seriously, and she really had no agency in the house. And as a personality, I didn't enjoy her much at all, but she didn't bother me, so she was effectively just harmless. I will say that week 10 is probably the least predictable, or at least based on the final 4, the final 3, and who can beat who. In that case, it's least predictable, but in general, it's just an okay finale, and it doesn't have the wow factor or the shock factor that the other 2 final weeks have either in the prior 2 seasons. So Godfrey touches base with everyone and reaffirms his deals with all of them. Ashley knows Godfrey isn't trustworthy, but Ashley has no one else, and Godfrey does feel like he owes Brittany for being his guardian angel. Sarah wins the HOH competition. Ashley and Godfrey realize that they need to get Sarah to turn on Brittany, and that Brittany will be a hard person to beat at the end. They have the conversation with Sarah, but Ashley is not subtle at all, and Godfrey tries to do damage control. Ashley tries to get Brittany to turn against Sarah by mentioning that Zach told her that many people think Sarah is behind all of Brittany's moves, and that she can't beat her, which Brittany doesn't believe. All the girls realize that Godfrey doesn't have one juror who would never vote for them. Sarah nominates Ashley and Godfrey for eviction. Godfrey talks to Brittany to make Ashley seem as intimidating as possible, so Brittany boots Ashley. And he does the same thing with his conversation with Ashley, hoping she boots Brittany. Ashley ends up winning the veto, as she and Sarah are the only ones who study their days, and Brittany quits the competition, making this Ashley's third consecutive veto, and she makes the very obvious move to evict Brittany, despite the latter trying to make a final two with Ashley. Brittany was definitely very emotional at times throughout the season, and she's definitely a nice person, though I did find her diary rooms to be very cringeworthy, because it was clear that they had her put on this act that wasn't naturally her. As a game player, I did find a lot of her moves to be emotional instead of strategic, but I do like that she won when she needed to and made the big moves that needed to be made at times. I didn't like that people overlooked her throughout the first 2/3 of the season, and she did have bonds with the likes of Bobby and Bruno that Sarah didn't have, and without those bonds, I truly don't think the Jordan flip happens, so I do think that should go on her resume. But Brittany was definitely an unexpected one. I didn't expect her to be as dominant as she was in the season, and I don't think anyone did. But of course, she was saved by that coup d'etat twist, which I really, really, really dislike, and it causes me to dock her as a player. Overall, she was a rootable presence in the season, and as a player, I wouldn't say she's a good player, but I wouldn't say she's a bad player. Maybe I'll have to look more into it, into my player rankings, and see how I feel about her there. Arista tells the final three that they have to evict someone from the jury, and Godfrey states that if Zach is gone, everyone would think on their own, which Sarah agrees with. Ashley says the same about Bobby and Cindy. Sarah states that Bruno and Bobby will never vote for her. Godfrey states that Cindy, Brittany, and Zach will never vote for him. They each choose two people that they want to protect. Ashley chooses Zach and Pilar, Godfrey chooses Bobby and Bruno, and Sarah chooses Brittany and Cindy. Ultimately, they choose to remove Jordan from the jury. Godfrey ends up winning part 1 of the final HOH, and Ashley wins part 2 of the final HOH. Sarah campaigns her butt off to get either Godfrey or Ashley to take her to the final 2. Godfrey wins the final HOH and evicts Ashley, which I don't think is the ideal move for him whatsoever. Ashley is someone who I didn't think much of throughout a majority of the season. She did have a good social game throughout, as mostly everyone liked her, and she was brought into the Chop Shop Alliance, where she was loyal to them, but she also had other options that she explored, which then turned into the Diaper Alliance. She didn't make as many mistakes as her allies Kevin and Zach did, and she didn't not play the game like Pilar did. And of course, there was her HOH, which was completely screwed over by the coup d'etat. And of course, the returning twist didn't help her at all, since it caused her ally, Jordan, to go home. She did turn it up during the last 2 weeks of the season, and I do think that she is a good player and will do well on most seasons. As a personality, I didn't enjoy her much, since if she wasn't on the edit much and she was just kind of shown as Zach's girlfriend for a lot of the season, but she does get rootable at times, and she's not a bad character or someone who will piss you off. Overall, I think she's an underrated player and a fine enough personality. Okay, so I'm going to try and get through the final speeches and the jury questioning quickly. Cindy asked Godfrey what he would do if she never came back into the house, and he says that he stuck to his people that he already built relationships with, and they would have kept him around. Bobby asks Sarah how much of her strategy was not hiding behind bigger threats, and she mentions her social game and using some of her weaknesses, like her emotions, to her advantage, as well as just not shutting up. Jordan asks Sarah if her ruthlessness was a part of her strategy and if her relationships with the house guests were real. She asks him that her relationships were genuine, but she did not cut people unless she knew that she wasn't their number one anymore, and mentions that she knew Jordan would never turn on Zach, so she voted him out. Willow asks Sarah if the relationship was real or just game, and Sarah says, of course, their relationship was real, and it often put a target on her back. Pilar asks Godfrey if stirring the pot was his personality or a game, and he mentions that it was all game, since there was a method to his madness. Brittany asks Sarah how she beat the odds to make it to the end, and she mentions that she rolled with the punches, and Brittany was a huge reason she made it to the end. Bruno asks Sarah who she would have taken to the end over Willow and Sarah, and she mentions she would have taken Brittany, since many people mentioned to people that Sarah was quote-unquote manipulating Brittany, and she thinks she could have beaten her. Kevin asks Sarah if she fought for Kevin when he was nominated in the triple, and Sarah admits that she did it, since she knew that she lost him to the Diaper Alliance. Zach asks Godfrey what was his biggest move that he made in the game, and Godfrey answers that he came in with a set strategy, so he didn't make a big move because he didn't have to make a big move, and that he could rely on his relationships and arguments, but he did mention that he did win the final HOH. Ashley asks Sarah what moves she made without Brittany, and Sarah responds that she kept the Bobby Vito lie from Brittany, told Kevin about the Jordan vote and Jordan going home ahead of time, and always talking game to everyone, where Brittany didn't talk game to everyone. Sarah's final speech is about using her strengths and weaknesses to her advantage and talked game with everyone. Godfrey mentions that he was on the outs of the house and claimed that he started to feel the turn against the Showmances, but then he went under the radar when he needed to. Sarah ends up winning in a 7-2 vote, and it would have been 8-2 vote if Jordan's vote was included. Godfrey was such a breath of fresh air, as I truly don't think there has been anyone like him who has been cast in Big Brother US or Canada, which I cannot say for many other house guests. He had this energy, he had this dynamicism, and he had this charisma that was definitely missing throughout many other house guests this season, and while he wasn't shown in the first half of the season, he definitely made his presence known with his speeches, which became very influential over most of the succeeding Big Brother Canada seasons. I do think that he lost because him not making himself a threat so he can make it to the end worked out too well to the point where he became a goat and he didn't make big moves. And this was a cast full of superfans. It is the most superfan heavy cast in North American Big Brother history. And they wanted big moves, they wanted cutthroatness, and he just didn't give that to them. But he had a unique strategy that worked for him, and he was one of the standouts of the season, for sure. Sarah's just a really likable presence in the house and in the season, and I really enjoy her as a person. Strategically, she definitely wasn't the best, since there are several points in the season where she made the wrong moves, but she was always resilient, she always tried with everyone, and her best skills in the game was her social skills. She was also another dynamic person as a personality in the house, and she made the season a lot more fun. And you just can't help but root for her. But she definitely had a few twists that helped propel her in the game where she wouldn't have made it to the end otherwise, and definitely causes me to drop her down a few points and maybe a tier or two on my list as a player. But she, like the other two winners before her, have some controversy and asterisk with her, so she fits in with them. Okay, so going through week to week, it causes me to pretty much feel more solidified that I'm ranking the season third out of the 3 seasons so far. And while I do think the gap isn't as wide as I thought years ago, as it's pretty tight, there's really only like 3 to 4 good weeks, and the rest were kind of bleh. The production value and the visuals definitely increased, And I do feel like this is really the last of the tryhard super fans who are trying to create their own image and narrative and trying to replicate things that they saw from others in the past, mainly from Big Brother US. And this is the start of the production pet superfans starting to slightly go away, as the next season is very recruit heavy. I feel like if they held it back on the twists, this season could have been the best one, since everyone in the cast, for the most part, was ready to play and ready to get down and dirty, which you couldn't say for most of the Big Brother 2 and Big Brother 1 casts. But this season is the lightest cast, and it's the lightest season where there is definitely some humorous moments, so it is an enjoyable watch. I'm going to rank the players of Big Brother Canada 3, and that's going to be something, since there are so many asterisks beside the gameplay that happened in the season. Thank you all for following me, and I'll be back with something soon. Take care.